to the biology presentation. The presenter this afternoon is Mr. George Owiti Otieno. Mr. George Owiti Otieno is an examiner with NEC in biology paper 2. It is my sincere hope that by the end of this presentation, you will be very much conversant with the main principles or axioms that we use in marking of examination. After the presentation, I will welcome questions, areas of concern, and then the feedback will be given accordingly. Biology is one of the subjects which over time has been gaining low performance, and that has been a concern not only of Machakos County, but the entire Kenya as a nation. So it's very much important for a student who is waiting to do exams to be very keen on the most important points. Biology paper 2, which is the area of our concern this afternoon, has 2 sections. The paper has 2 sections. We have paper 1, we have section A. Section A has 40 marks. So you can see each with 5 questions. We have question 1 up to question 5, and each question has 8 marks, totaling to 40 marks. Section A is compulsory. Every student must attempt those questions. Then section B has 3 questions. Section B has 3 questions, with question 6, 7, and 8. Question 6 is a biological graph question. Biological graph question is compulsory. Every student must attempt that question. Then we have question 7 and 8, which are the essays. And students are required to choose 1 essay question out of the 2. I want to be very clear on essay question, because this is where most students fall a prey to not following the instruction. It must be very clear for candidates that in NEC, we accept only, we mark only the first attempted question by the candidate. We only mark the first attempted question by the candidate, such that if you attempt question 7, and maybe probably you don't score well in question 7, and you also attempt question 8, and you score very high marks in question 8, let's say out of 20 marks, you score 18 out of 20, and in question 7, you scored 5 out of 20, the marking regulation requires examiner to award only the first attempted question and cancel the second attempted question with the word EQ written on that question. We cancel the second attempted question, which may be question 8 or 7, and then we write the word EQ. EQ stands for extra question answered, and it will not be awarded. Therefore, upon you to narrow down on one question which you can answer adequately so that you don't fall into that problem. I want to talk about, before I enter deeper into paper 2, it's very much important for us to look at what the paper tests. The paper is based on Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives. Bloom's taxonomy, as everybody knows, tests levels of knowledge, comprehension, application. Those are the most common areas where the paper dwells. Under knowledge, a student is expected to recall and remember biological facts which were taught by their respective teachers. By comprehension, a student is expected to reflect a scientific understanding of the biological concept. You are required in such an area to account. You will find words like account. You will find terminologies like explain. You will find terminologies like describe at the area of comprehension. Then another level of Bloom's taxonomy, which is now the third level, is application. At that level, a student is expected to apply basic biological concepts which have already been imparted by their respective teachers. These concepts require a student to be able to match. You will find questions like match. You will find questions like relate. You will find questions like label at the application level. At synthesis, not many early questions come at the synthesis level because synthesis is expected at a university or a college level. So in our biology paper 2, at the Bloom's taxonomy level, we are so much concentrated on knowledge, comprehension, and application. Those are the main important parts which a student should concentrate in. I want, first of all, to give out the main marking rules which we have in biology. When you are given a question with instructions to state 2 functions, like you can give an example, you can get a question requiring 2 functions of, let's say, a certain structure like the skin. And you find a situation where a candidate gives 4 answers in this particular question with point number 1 and point number 2 wrong, and point number 3 and point number 4 correctly written, then we shall mark point number 1 and point number 2 and draw a line below point number 3 and 4 with a rubric in mark indicating that those are extra answers given and they will not, students will not be awarded. What is the point? The point is that students are expected to answer the question based on instruction. If the examiner requires 2 answers, it is the prerogative of the candidate to ensure that he or she narrows down to 2 answers which are required by the examiner, such that candidates may be advised to write the sample answers he or she have in a rough paper, like let's say question paper, and then choose the most strong answers and write them on the spaces provided. I think that one is clear, and it should remain like that. The second aspect which we consider so much when we are marking is spellings. Biology is a very key subject which should lead a candidate to some of the very key courses: medicine, medical engineering, nursing, and so on. So we expect this student who is supposed to pass in biology to be a very keen personality, not careless, not ignorant, and in such a case, we expect spellings of biological terminologies to be very accurate. Most students fall a prey to this marking axiom, such that they write correct answers, but in the course of writing an answer, they find themselves misspelling some of the key biological terminologies. It is not allowed. It is not accepted. And I want that correction to be taken by candidates. Make sure your spellings are correct. At certain times during marking, examiners may decide to accept, just to accept. And I want you to mark my word clearly. At certain times, they may decide to accept a biological terminology which has no other meaning if it is misspelled. It should be a biological terminology, and it should not have any other English meaning all over in the universe. Such a terminology may be accepted depending on the chief of biology when it is being marked at a given time. But to be on the safe side, we advise candidates to be very keen on their spellings, and those spellings should be very well written in such a manner that if a candidate is expected to name, the name should always begin in a capital letter. The names should always begin with a capital letter. That is also a very key area which many candidates ignore. Make sure that your names begins with capital letters. Now, another most important area which is looked at during marking, when we mark, we check at, I want maybe to narrow down on section B first, because it's the main key area to passing of paper 2. If a candidate fails in section B, which is 40 marks out of 80, then that candidate cannot score below B, above B mean. If you fail in section B, you may not find it easy to score above grade B. What is my justification for that statement? You find that Section B has biological graph question, where a candidate will be required to draw a graph. A candidate will be required to draw a graph. Anybody can draw a graph. You draw graph in other subjects like maths, geography, and so on. Even chemistry, there are graphs. So if you fail to get 7 or 8 marks, which are awarded in graph drawing, then it means that other candidates will have an advantage over you. It is my expectation that if I give clear instruction on the skills required in graph drawing, then candidates will be able to draw good graphs which can earn them marks. What do we look at when we are drawing biological graphs? I want somebody to be very keen on the marking scheme for the graph alone. There is always A standing for axis. A standing for axis. There is always P standing for plotting. Plotting. There is always C. There is always C standing for, there is always C, there is always A standing for axis. There is always P standing for plotting. There is always C standing for curves. There is always S standing for scale. There is always I standing for identity. I want to make, those are the main areas which must exist when a graph, biological graph, is being marked. I want to talk about axis. Remember, a basic graph has both vertical and horizontal axis. What do we mark when we are talking about the axis? When we are talking about the axis, axis must always be labeled. Labeling of the axis. Axis must always be labeled. And by labeling the axis, I want, or we always require a candidate to give whatever the axis, if it is a vertical axis, whatever the axis stands for, and then if there are units for that label, they should be placed inside a bracket with units well indicated. So axis should involve the item which is concentrated on that particular axis with the units at inside the bracket. So like, for example, there is a graph which I will show you briefly. There's a graph which I will show you briefly. In this graph, you will be able to see the axes which are labeled and the same axis having the units. Such that now, the second, check. Where is it? It was transferred using the phone. Using the memory from the camera. Oh. The second aspect, which is the plotting, I want us to be very keen here, because plotting, I want us to be very keen when it comes to plotting, because in plotting, a candidate is expected to plot accurately using an X, which is correctly placed at the point, or a dot, a small dot. It should be very small, correctly placed at the point. Those are the only two signs accepted for plotting. And mark the point that the dot should be placed only at the accurate location together, and that mark, if it is X, like this one, it should be placed, it should be a small kind of, not exaggerated X or an exaggerated dot. Plotting is the key factor in graph work. Wrong plotting will give wrong curve and will result into wrong scaling. So make sure that your plotting is very much accurate. How can you make an accurate plotting? Most students, I'm a teacher, most students don't practice graph work. They wait to tackle graph work in examinations. It is my urge for students to make sure that almost every day you pick a graph question and you practice, so that you are able to be conversant with the plotting skills. Next, I want to talk about the scale before I talk about the curve. What do we mean by this word, a scale? You will be given units in a table. These units, which will be in a table, is the prerogative of the candidate to identify a suitable scale on this particular graph work. You should be able to identify the scale. By scale, we mean that the 10 squares within your graph, what do they present? One small square within this particular graph paper, what does it present? Remember, a graph is just a presentation of facts and figures on a paper. I want you not to consider the graph as a drawing. It is a representation of a certain fact. So within a small square, what does it present? That is a very important point a candidate should consider. And in most cases, I, with experience, would recommend that if a candidate has to come up with a scale, it has to be in the units of 1, 2, 5, 10, or multiples of that. It should be in the units of 1, 2, 5, 10, or multiples of all this. Why do we always prefer such for a candidate? Such figures are easy to plot, and they're easy for candidates to work with to bring accuracy in plotting. If you use these ones, which in most cases we discourage, if you use 3, 7, 6, 11, 13, you find that these are numbers which in mathematics, I think they call them odd. And in most cases, even the figures you will be given on the graph tables, you'll find that it will cost a student to plot if they use such figures in their scale, such that if it can be avoided, such figures should be avoided. Such figures should be avoided in the candidate's scale. But remember, most of the work depends on the situation at a given time. So I want candidates to be very clear here. Answering exams is situational. Don't say that the instructor told us not to use these figures. You may find figures which are on the graphical table, which can be suitable with 3, 7, 6, 11, or 13. So, but in most cases, with experience we have in marking, in most cases, you will find that most graphs do well with the figures I have stated there. Then after now the scale, I will now deal with the curve. What should we consider when we are talking about a curve? The first and most important thing about the curve in biological graph is that the pencil I recommend is an HP pencil, because the pen is easy to sharpen to give a clear line which can easily be seen as a correct curve. What do we look at the curve? A curve should be short of any rubbing. If you want to rub, it's not always at the curve level. It demands for a smooth curve. We require, this is where now we test the personality of this particular candidate. Are you accurate in your drawing, or you are type of a candidate whose fingers, because of panicking, is already trembling during writing of exams? Are you able to write a smooth curve? Is your curve smooth? Is your curve continuous? Is it continuous? Is your curve broken? Is it broken? We don't allow broken curves. We also don't allow double lines. We don't allow double lines. Double lines. We don't allow double lines. We don't allow dotted lines unless it is indicated. We don't allow dotted lines. We need a smooth curve. We don't allow curves drawn using a ruler. Drawing curve should be hand smooth, free curve drawn by a student. And the curve should pass on the points which already the student has already plotted. Don't pass your curve outside the environment of that particular curve. In fact, it should pass on top of that particular point. What do you do when there is a curve downwards? A student should ensure that when the curve points are moving downwards, a student should ensure that there is a smooth U-turn. You should have a smooth U-turn, not a slugged U-turn. U-turn should be smooth so that you don't lose the figures and the points which you plotted. I think I have overemphasized the curve. Curves should also have an identity. After you have already drawn the curve, then you should equip it with the identity. What do I mean by identifying the curve? The curve, let's say, if it is for inhaling, like the graph I'm yet to show you, a well-drawn graph work, which I'm yet to show you. If it is for inhaling, you should draw the curve, and then you identify the curve, inhaling. And inhaling should be written horizontally. We don't allow labeling of the curve when they are not written horizontally. Like this student may not get a label, inhaling. It is written slanting. You can check this one is slanting, and this one is horizontal. So this one would get mark for labeling of the curve, but this one, who labels the curve, but in a slanting manner, this one, we don't allow this one in our biology. Everything labeled should be written in a horizontal manner. So there is always marks for identity. I would have wished to show you, in most cases, axes. We have two axes. When they're well labeled, you find a candidate getting 2 marks, because there is vertical axis and horizontal axis. So you get 2 marks. When a scale is well written, a continuous scale, a scale with origin, we look at the origin of the scale. There is a student, there are candidates who may begin to write, they may begin to draw a curve, and they're coming up with their own scale. I'm illustrating over here. They come up with their own scale, and you find that this candidate is having 0 at the origin, which is well written, but the first end of a square, that is a large square, this candidate writes 40. And the other one, you find the candidate now writing 45. This scale is not continuous scale. It is not a consistent scale. If you want your work to begin at 40, then we expect the candidate to have a broken line there, with the origin here indicated clearly that the origin should be at 40. And now this particular level point should not be 0. 0 should now be written there. 0 should now be written there. 0 should now be written here, not here, not here at the center, not there at the center. Why? Because if it is written here at the center, it means that it is standing for both vertical and horizontal scales. But if it is written here, it means that this 0 stands only for the horizontal axis. So make sure that you are very keen on the scale or on the origin, because if your origin is not well indicated, then automatically your scale will be wrong. When we consider your scales wrong, everything like plotting, you cannot use a wrong scale to make a correct plotting. Will be wrong. You cannot have a wrong plotting with a correct curve. Will be wrong. So in such a case, the only thing you can get is the labeling of the axis plus maybe the labeling of the curve. In such a case, a candidate may not pass 3 marks. You may not pass 3 marks. And remember, graph work is always one of the easiest part of the question. So my point there is that when you are plotting, writing the scales, you'll be very keen to choose a suitable scale. And I want now to talk about extrapolation of the curve. Extrapolation of the curve. There are students, candidates, who have a tendency of extrapolating their curves. They have a tendency of extrapolating their curves. They extend the curves beyond the one which has been indicated on their tabulation. By extrapolation, I mean an extension of the curve, beyond the required level. Like this one. Allow me to erase this. Allow me to erase this. Such that now, when you extrapolate, if that is the end, this point is the end expected for your graph, and then by drawing and panicking of the candidate, you extend even by one small square. If you extend even by one small square like that, this is an extrapolation. This is what we call extrapolation. That is what we call extrapolation. Extrapolation is not accepted, and it will make the marks for the graph, the curve, marks for the curve to go. And if mark of the curve has gone, automatically the marks for plotting will also go. So as candidate must be very keen not to extrapolate. Just make sure that you extend the curve up to the point indicated by the figures on the table. That one is a very much important area you should consider. I think I may have overemphasized the graph work. I know many questions will come from graph work, which is expected because graph is everything we need, especially when it comes to section B. I want now to talk about questions on section B or on the graph, questions coming from the graph. The first aspect of the question which comes from the graph is that the candidate should be able to understand the meaning of the data. The candidate should be in a position to understand the meaning of the data. You should be in a position to understand the meaning of the data which is provided. How do you understand the meaning of the data which is provided? How do you understand the meaning of the data which is provided? A candidate should know if, I'm not seeing my picture. because I'm not seeing my. Yeah. So my image, such that now, if okay, it's okay, such that if you are dealing with, let's say, a question on insulin, you have been given figures dealing with insulin hormone. Everybody knows that insulin hormone is one of the hormones which are used to reduce the blood sugar level. So a student should have an understanding, theoretical understanding of the figures which are provided within the graph. That one is a very important concept, factor, when you are dealing with answering graphical questions. You must be conversant with theoretical concepts. And then a candidate should use certain terminologies when you are answering graphical questions. Terminologies we recommend, you must find, because it's a graph, and a graph has certain phases. Remember, we have always the phase which is exponential. We have a phase which is maybe at a plateau stage. We have a phase which is decelerating. You know all those elements in graph, in the curves. So a candidate should use certain biological terminologies involving the saying that there is rapid increase. Look at the word rapid, not high. There is rapid. That one is accepted. There is exponential. That is on the increase side. On the decrease side, a candidate can use slow, decelerating, gradual. Those are terminologies which are expected. Remember, biology, there's something you ought to know about our subject, candidates, or even my viewers. You ought to know that the subject we are dealing with is a subject which has its own terminologies, and those terminologies should be used by the candidates. They should be used as if they are owned by the candidates. So when you are describing the graph, or you are describing the events on the graph, we expect you to use terminologies like rapid, exponential. On the other side, we expect you to use terminologies like slow, gradual, decelerating, on that particular manner. I've talked much about graph work. I want now to talk about essay questions. Essay questions. With essay questions, that is question number 7 and number 8. Remember, on my opening remarks, I was very clear and told students that essay question, you must choose one and attempt only one question. Don't attempt 2. Never and ever attempt 2 essay questions. Attempt 1, because you will waste a lot of time, but examiners will only mark the first essay question. I want to describe essay questions as belonging to 2 types. We have 2 types of essay questions. We have sequential essay questions. Sequential essay questions. What do I mean by sequential essay questions? A sequential essay question is a type of a question which requires steps or procedures. In a question requiring a candidate to write steps or procedures, a candidate must be very much aware that if you miss steps or you mix steps, then you lose direction and you lose your marks. From the point, you lose the steps. It is as strict as that. If you write step number 1 at step number 4, and write step number 4 at step number 1, automatically at that level, you will have lost all those marks because it is a sequential essay question. I would be very clear if I give an example of a sequential question, especially in essay. An example of a question is this: describe the process of blood circulation in a mammalian heart. If you receive such a question, I will repeat the question. Describe the process of blood circulation in mammalian heart. You will find that such a question requires a candidate to be very much familiar with the parts of the mammalian heart. The candidate should be very much familiar with the blood vessel, in this particular case, the major vein, which is the vena cava, which takes in the deoxygenated blood from all the body parts. This candidate should be very much aware that the first chamber of blood of the heart, which this particular deoxygenated blood will enter at first when it is from vena cava, is the right atrium chamber. This candidate should be very much aware that this blood from the right atrium chamber, when it is full, this blood should pass through tricuspid valve into the right ventricle chamber. This particular candidate should also be very much aware that after the right ventricle chamber is full of blood, there will be the closing of the tricuspid valve to prevent the backflow, and then the walls of the right ventricle chamber will contract, and then this blood will be pumped out through the pulmonary artery. This candidate should be very much aware that along the pulmonary artery, this blood will enter into the lungs for oxygen addition by diffusion. This candidate should also be very much aware that from the lungs, this particular blood now, which is now oxygenated, will come back to the heart through pulmonary vein and enter the left atrium chamber. And this candidate should be very much aware that when this particular blood is full in the right atrium chamber, in the left atrium chamber, I mean, this blood will cause pressure on the bicuspid valve to open to allow it to enter into the left ventricle. When the left ventricle chamber is full of blood, this particular candidate should talk of bicuspid valve closing to allow to prevent the backflow of the blood, and then this blood, the walls of the right ventricle, the left ventricle, will contract forcefully and pump this blood to the rest of the body parts through the aorta. So you find that such a sequential type of an essay question requires you to move, such that if you mention for me the lungs, before mentioning for me the right atrium or the right ventricle, you find that you will have lost the sequence and such a candidate may not score. So when you are choosing an essay question, a candidate should be very keen on sequential question. If you doubt any step in the sequence and there is an alternative question you can tackle, make sure that you deal with an alternative, because so many students have always been losing marks from the sequence questions. That's one of the example. Another example maybe of the sequence question, maybe describe the process of water absorption from the soil. Describe the process of water absorption from the soil by the plant's root. Describe the process of water absorption from the soil by plants' roots. You find that such a question, a candidate should move step by step, until these water molecules are absorbed by the root hair cells, until these water molecules, from the root hair cells, these water molecules is absorbed by the surrounding epidermal cells, until these water molecules reaches the xylem vessels, which are actually located at the center of the root. So if you don't give such a sequence, such a candidate may not get the marks. Allow me to talk about the second type of an essay question, which is non-sequential. Non-sequential essay question. Non-sequential essay question. Non-sequential essay question requires the candidate. Non-sequential essay question requires the candidate now to write points without following a specific sequence. Just as the word says, you are required to write the questions without following a proper order of events. I will give samples. I will give examples of questions, essay questions, which come at such a level. You know them as candidates. I know you are well prepared by your respective teachers. A candidate may get a question requiring him or her to state the adaptations of the mammalian eye to its function. State adaptations, various adaptations of mammalian eye to its function. That's just an example I'm giving. In such a question, a candidate is required to move from one structure with adaptation and function and to another structure with adaptation and function, not following any particular order. So you find that in the marking scheme in the marking scheme, there will be no requirement for the sequential answers. So such a candidate is free. I will give an example in that particular question, because you are biology students and I'm a biology teacher. I can give you a simple illustration for that question. Like, for example, in the question about describing the structure of adaptation of the mammalian eye to its function, you may find a candidate talking about cornea, say that the mammalian eye has cornea. Then you say that cornea is the name of the structure. Then you talk of adaptation. In that particular case, what's the adaptation of the cornea? A cornea, it is transparent. That's the adaptation. And then you give the function, which allows passage of light. You see that point? Then another point, this candidate would skip all the parts surrounding the cornea and talk of the eye has a vitreous humor. Look at where the cornea is and where the vitreous humor is. Which is a vitreous humor, that's a name, which is a viscous fluid. That one is the adaptation to allow refraction of light into the fovea. That one is the function. So non-sequential question, a student may get a structure from one point and a structure from another point, not necessarily on any sequence. I hope I am very clear. It's the prerogative of the candidate to ensure that you choose a question that you are able to produce so many marks in. Like in the instance of last year's question, the slides, I want to give an example of the last year's essay question where students were supposed to choose. I'm getting to the question. This was a question which was there last year on essay. This one was one of the questions which was there on the essay. The question reads, and I hope you are able to see the question from your end. Describe how increase in physical activity affects the following organs. This was 20 marks. I know you have seen the past papers, 2019. So you find that a student would be conversant with part A, we have lungs, part B, we have heart, part B, we have lungs, part C, we have kidney, part D, we have the skin. So you may find a student who is only conversant with part A, where how increase in physical activity would affect the heart. But this particular candidate may not be conversant with part B, how increase in physical activity may affect the lungs, may not be conversant with how it would affect the kidney or the skin. And you find because this candidate may not have been well advised, this candidate may choose this question only to write how increase in physical activity would affect the heart and get 4 marks out of that, and then fail the one for lungs, fail the one for kidney, and fail the one for skin, and come up with 4 out of 20 marks. A candidate, this is just an example, a candidate is advised to select or choose that question which he or she is able to produce many accurate marks in. And as I can repeat my statement, you are supposed only to attempt 1 between number 7 and number 8. That is how far I can discuss the essay question. Of course, I know questions will come, and I will respond to them from time to time. I want to give you an illustration of a very good paper, which was a trial paper. So it was a trial paper for one of these senior counties. And I feel that we can discuss some of the questions and the marking schemes with you so that you are able to understand exactly what we are talking about. First of all, I want us to see the part of the question part on section B. The question part on section B, where candidates, that's the answer part, question part, where candidates were required, section B, candidates were required, that is question number 6, question number 6. Candidates were required to plot a graph using figures which were provided. Just in a matter of seconds, I hope it's now clear on your end. Yes, this one. So I want you to concentrate on section written section B. Concentrate on section written section B, so that you understand what I was talking about in the graph. I want to read as you follow. Diabetes mellitus is a condition where the body is unable to maintain constant concentration of glucose in the blood. That's a statement. It's a biological statement. It's meant to remind you of what you are taught by your teachers. It is caused by failure of pancreas to secrete sufficient insulin hormone. That's a biological statement, which is meant also to remind you of what you have already been taught. Now the question. The condition can be controlled by periodic administration of insulin. That one is also a statement, which is correct, and you have been taught that, which can be done through injection into the vein or breathing into the nasal spray. Those ones are statements. Imagine you are given a question with correct statements. The table below shows a concentration of glucose of a person after injecting or inhaling insulin. So you are given a table, and this table has concentration, is showing concentration of glucose of a person after injecting or inhaling the insulin. I want us to, so A candidate, after you will have read the question, then you should now analyze the table. A candidate, get your time and analyze that table and see where that table is ranging from. I can see time. I can see hours. We have 0 hours. Whenever you see 0 hours, it means that that is the beginning of the experiment. Then we have up to 8 hours. Glucose concentration in blood, the units you are given there. You are given the units. Glucose concentration in blood is always given in milligrams per 100 ml after the injection. So at 0 hours, the glucose concentration was 100. And remember, the accurate one is always at a certain level. Then after 1 hour, it is reducing to 68. After 2 hours, it is reducing to 46. After 3 hours, it is 30. After 4 hours, it's 22, 33, 36, 38 is now again increasing, and then 40. Then you check glucose concentration in the blood for that after inhaling insulin, after inhaling of the insulin. So you can see now the figure is moving from 100, the same as the upper one, and it is moving from 42, from 100 to 42, and it is reducing, and it is reducing, and it is reducing. This figure, whoever came up with this figure already have a certain scientific concept which you are taught. And this particular teacher or this particular examiner wants to confirm whether you understand that scientific concept, which is now represented on this table. So when you are given a table, what you should understand is that there is a secret scientific biological concept which this particular examiner wants to confirm whether you are able to reiterate or write or explain it clearly. Then on the same, I want now to concentrate on the question. There is 8 marks which is being given. And I always tell my students that 8 marks in a graph work is a free mark which is given. And as manners, you should be able to get that 8 marks. So here we come on the same axis, on the same axis. That one is, you should underline that one, on the same axis. On the same axis, draw graph of blood glucose concentration against time. You draw graph of blood glucose concentration against time. We have blood glucose concentration and we have time. Between blood glucose concentration and time, those are 2 factors. A candidate should be able to differentiate between dependent variable. We have dependent variable and independent variable. When you are given, you should be able to differentiate between dependent variable and independent variable. Dependent variable and independent variable. So in every graph work, we have dependent. In every graph work, we have dependent. In every graph work, we have dependent variable. In every graph work, we have dependent variable, dependent. That is a dependent variable. And independent variable. Independent variable. So in this particular case, if you are very keen, there is a variable which is not depending on another. And always in life, even right now, candidates, there is a factor which even if you revise or you don't revise for exams, it is not depending on you. And that one is time. Time will not wait for you. It has never waited for even a king. So in most cases, time is always an independent variable in any case. And an independent variable is always attributed to an x-axis. Independent. It is independent. It does not depend on you. It is not going to depend on this particular patient who is being injected with insulin. So whenever you see a graph, so that you may not interchange the axes. Because the moment you interchange the axes, then marking of a graph stops and you get a 0. Ensure that you differentiate between dependent variable and independent variable. And whenever time is present, because in most cases you will find time, you should consider time an independent variable, and it should always be on the x-axis. Now, the dependent variable is the concentration of glucose concentration in the blood. Dependent variable is the glucose concentration in the blood. Dependent variable is the glucose concentration in the blood. And now, from there, right from there, a candidate should now draw axes. Right from there, a candidate now has the capacity to draw the axis and even label the axis. A candidate should now draw the axis, like I would draw the glucose on the x-axis. On the x-axis, I would draw time. And remember, time on the x-axis, I would indicate time. And remember, time, if you can check that particular table, time is given in hours. So I will put hours in brackets. On the vertical axis, I would write glucose concentration in blood, and then I would open a bracket and write in which units. I would write in milligrams per 100 ml. And then I finish what we call labeling of the axis. I would finish labeling of the axis. Then now that you have that particular graph, and you have that particular table, I want to show you already drawn graph of that particular table. Just because of time, I want to show you the already drawn graph of that particular table, so that it can come clear to you whatever I was referring to when I was talking about the graph. Over here is a drawn graph of the same table. And this particular candidate drew the graph just following the rules I gave out. The graph was drawn. And as you can see from your end, the x-axis in that particular graph, is time in hours. And if you check the marking scheme clearly, my marking scheme is down there. If you can check the marking scheme clearly, you will find that axis is given 1 mark. Axis is given 1 mark. And how many axes are we talking about? We are talking about 2 axes, which gives you 2 marks. Then we are coming to scale. A scale, how many scales do we have? We have horizontal scale and vertical scale. As you can see, horizontal scale is all about time. Vertical scale is all about concentration of glucose. And you can see 1 times 2. So horizontal scale has 1 mark. Vertical scale has another mark. And then now that one amounts to 2 marks. Then we come to my extreme left. We talk about the plotting. Plotting, how many graphs are we plotting here? We are plotting 2 graphs. We are plotting 2 curves. Every curve has 1 mark. Every curve has 1 mark when it is well plotted. How many curves do we have? We have 2 curves, and that one gives you 2 marks. Then curves, when you are labeling the curve, you get a half a mark. This one, it stands for labeling of the curve. You get a half mark, and that is a half times 2, which is 1. And so on and so forth. So you find that this my curve, the curve which has been drawn here, has very clear, smoothly drawn, freehand drawn, no ruler used. The points, the curve passes at the points which were plotted. There is a crossover at this particular point where the curves cross, and then the curve has at no any other point extrapolated. There's no any extrapolation. So such a curve can stand a test for examination marking. Everything is very clear. The origin of the scale is well written as 0. You can see 0 standing for both vertical and horizontal scale. And the scale is uniform. Let's look at the vertical scale. Starting from 0 to 10, those are 10, those are 5 small squares. Then we are moving to from 10 to 20, another 5. Then we are moving from 20 to 30. So you can see the scale is uniform. There's no case in which you can find that we are coming from 0 to 5, then 5 to 15. That one we shall call it inconsistent scale, and you will lose scale. The moment you use scale, you will lose plotting, and you will also lose everything. I want you to check the time on the horizontal axis. Time is very clear there, as you can see. These ones are 10 small squares. 10 small squares. It's standing for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and it is exactly ending at 8, which is given at the table. You don't extend, just 8, which is given at the table. So that is the graphical answering, drawing expected from a candidate. I want now to go to the questions. Let's go to the questions. I want now to go to the questions which are given on the graph, and I want to use this just to explain, because most students wonder how. They come to me, especially even my students, they do come to me and tell me, Mwalimu, teach me how to answer the questions of the graph. There's no single way a teacher can explain to you how to write or answer the questions pertaining to the graph. It depends on case in time. The only thing a student should master is that in answering the graph work, a student is applying. That is what I was talking about, the application of, you are just making an application of what is expected. So, this is the answer. These are answers. Questions. I'm giving you the questions right away. The questions part of it. The questions part of it. This is section. The questions part of it. Part B, you are asked, after what time, part B, let us just maintain it at that level. After what time is the blood glucose concentration equal? After what time is the blood glucose concentration equal? When do we consider something equal? When do we consider something equal? In graph work, something becomes equal when the curves meet, exactly where the curves meet. That is when we consider figures to be equal. So such a candidate, if at all he or she has drawn a good diagram, should just check where the curves meet and then draw it downwards and then meet the correct hour and time when they are equal. Then part C, just leave it at the question. Part C, part 2, B part 2, account for the effect of injecting or inhaling insulin on blood glucose concentration for the first 1 hour. This examiner is very keen. Examiner is already aware that you know that if insulin is injected, I want you to check the injection part. If insulin is injected and it takes 1 hour, it reduces from 100, as you can see from the table, to 68. The examiner is already aware. Is already aware that that one you know, and you may have noted it and known it from the table. But now an examiner wants you to apply biological knowledge you have, that is the application stage in Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives. An examiner expects you to apply now this particular situation to your knowledge. What is taking place by accounting the effect of injecting or inhaling insulin in the first 1 hour? I want us, if possible, you write that question. If possible, you write the question. Just a minute so that we can magnify the presentation. I hope you are doing well. I'm soon finalizing for questions. So you can just prepare your questions. You will meet proper feedback from professionals. So we were magnifying so that you are able to see clearly. So I hope you should have written account for the effect of injecting or inhaling insulin on blood glucose concentration for the first 1 hour. I would have wished you write that question so that you see the response of that question, because that 3 marks is not just going to be given to a student who may not have known the secret of the marks. By the way, are you aware as a candidate to sit exams that marks is always a guideline? The marks attached to a question is always a clear guideline of the examiner's expectation. If you see 3 marks, ask yourself, is the feedback I've given worth 3 marks? If you see 3 marks and you write 1 sentence, in most cases, you never get the 3 marks. You may know, but you may not get the 3 marks which the examiner wants to award. So I was giving you time so that you may write the question. I hope you have written. I now want you to go and see the answer to that question, B part 2, so that I can show you exactly the marking points of that question. Marking point of that question. I'm getting it for you enlarged so that you can see. Very good. I want somebody to see this one, part C, which is that area which is written part C on the marking scheme. That is where that answer is. On inhaling insulin, comma, blood glucose concentration reduces. That one is an observation, is a marking point. Semicolon in NEC, in KCSE, semicolon, when we are marking, it stands for a marking point. It stands for a tick. So whenever you see semicolon in this my marking scheme, it means that if you write that, you are supposed to get a tick. such that now, if you clearly indicate this is an observation. If you check that table, you will see that on inhaling insulin, blood glucose concentration reduces. That one is an observation. So there's a mark for clear observation. How does it reduce? It reduces more rapidly. It reduces more rapidly than on injecting insulin. Are you now able to compare? Are you able to compare? Are you able to compare the rate of reduction? Are you able to compare the rate of reduction? Check when it is injected. When it is injected, it reduces from 100 to 68. You have the table. When it is inhaled, it reduces from 100 to 42. What does that show? That one shows that the reduction rate of the inhaling, check this one, check this rate of reduction. The reduction rate at the inhalation is very rapid compared to the reduction rate at the injecting. Are you able to see that? That is the second marking point. That is the second marking point. Are you able to see that? Then the third marking point, which is very much important, is that more rapidly than injecting insulin, because now we want you we want you to give us a biologically accepted, scientifically proven explanation or reason, something not any other layman can give. And that one is what stands for a question, explain, or account. Check the answer. When insulin is inhaled, its concentration in blood rises faster and reaches the liver faster. On injection, insulin takes longer to reach the liver. I want us to now concentrate on that reason. You know very well that the action of reduction of blood glucose level, insulin hormone is always produced by the pancreas, but the whole business of reduction of blood glucose level is always done at the liver. At which point will it reach the liver faster? At which point? When it is injected, it will have to move through all the body parts until it reaches the vena cava, until it reaches the heart, until it reaches the lungs, until it comes back to the heart, until it is pumped to the liver. It's a long, long, long distance. You should know that. But when it is inhaled, it will get directly into the lungs. You can see it has passed so many steps. Now it is in the lungs. In the lungs, it will be absorbed into the blood, and then it will reach the liver faster to effect the reduction of the blood glucose level. The examiner expects a candidate to be able to know that something inhaled is able to reach the liver faster than something which is injected. Because whenever something is injected, it must first of all pass through the body, other body parts. It must pass to another level, because injection, we inject at the veins. Remember, all the injections, and biologists are almost medics. Most of the injections, we don't inject arteries. No, we inject at the vein level. So, and the vein level, vein must first of all get its roots through the heart, and then it is pumped, and then is when it can reach other organs. So that one is the explanation for that point. So the marking point is that it is more rapid because when insulin is inhaled, its concentration in the blood rises faster or reaches the liver faster than when it is injected. That one is the only concept an examiner expects a student to know at that level. I want to go to another question. I want us to go to another question, the following question, because most students ask me, Mwalimu, train me on how to answer the questions on the graph. There, I can tell you there's no specific training. There's no specific formula for answering questions on the graph. A student must be somebody who already have the content. You must first of all have that biological content with you and then apply it. Remember the application at the Bloom's taxonomy. These are answers of educational objectives at the application level. Another question, which is very much important for me to discuss with you, is this. Explain how insulin insulin influences change in blood glucose concentration. Explain how insulin influences change in blood glucose concentration. Now, this one is a direct, already the examiner has asked you a question which requires application. Now, an examiner is asking a question which requires comprehension, second level in Bloom's taxonomy. Now you comprehend. Do you understand? Did you understand how insulin reduces the blood glucose concentration level? I want somebody, this is a direct question which just requires comprehension. It's at a comprehension stage in Bloom's taxonomy, and I want somebody to check the response which we gave to that question. At the response, when my technician is getting me to the response level, we are now there. Check the response. Insulin stimulates liver cells. Cells is written in brackets because once you say liver, when you're talking of liver, we know that we are talking of cells in the liver. So cells are in bracket. So when you say that insulin does not do that, I want you to underline the word stimulates. Insulin stimulates liver, tick, that is a semicolon, to convert excess glucose to glycogen. It is liver doing it, but under the command, under the stimulation, that one must come out very clearly. What is conducting that? Whatever is conducting it is the liver. But under instruction of, under stimulation of insulin hormone. And remember, insulin hormone is always secreted at the pancreas. To convert excess glucose to glycogen, that is a tick, or fat, a tick. It also may increase oxidation of glucose to water and carbon dioxide for respiration. That one are the ticks which we expect. Then those are the areas which I wanted. The other ones are memory questions, which I may not discuss because of time. I want, at that level, I want to welcome questions, concerns. Of course, the questions we expect in this particular platform should be questions on how marking takes place, conceptual questions, content questions should be referred to your respective teachers who are equally qualified as we are, so that they may assist you at that level. But the questions I expect are based on marking issues which you may have. I welcome the questions.
Kindly, for the schools who have questions, you can kindly have your hands lifted up. Let us have a question from St. Valentine's. St. Valentine's, you can go ahead and ask your question. St. Valentine's, you can go ahead and ask your question. St. Valentine's. St. Valentine's, you can go ahead and ask your question. Okay, as you prepare, let me have a question from Mua girls. Mua girls, you can go ahead and ask your question. Mua girls, you can go ahead and ask your question. Mua girls? Yes, go ahead and be more audible. More girls, kindly let's have some order.
I have a question on the essay.
Yes, be more audible.
I'm asking
Yes.
about the essay.
About
The essay.
the what?
The essay.
The essay question, yes.
So there's a question that was about how the increase in physical activity affects the following organs. Now there was the heart, the lungs, the kidney, and the skin.
How? Yes, that one was a last year's KCSE question.
Yes, so like when you maybe you don't know for the heart, you don't know for the first one,
Yes.
but you know if you don't know the first answer, but you know the second. If
You don't know the first, but you know the second. Let's say you may not know the heart.
yes,
You
but
may not know about the heart, but you know about the lungs.
yes.
Yes.
So will you still score or you must know all of them?
Okay, okay, that one you will get the answer.
Okay, let us have another question from Upper Kitanga Secondary School. Kindly, Upper Kitanga, you can go ahead and ask your question. Upper Kitanga.
My question is,
Yes.
if you are writing an essay questions, should you use a paragraph or you are going to use a in number form? Another question is, if you are writing an essay question and you don't consider the languages, are you penalized? Thank you.
Consider the what? What do you mean by the language? Maybe the spellings?
The tenses.
When you don't consider the tenses. Yes.
When you are not considering the tenses or whether it is present or in past tense.
Okay. That one you are going to be answered. Very good question. Okay, the first answer goes to students from Moore Hills Girls. The question was asking about the essay question, and it was based on an example of a question which came over in biology in the year 2019. The question talked about, if I can read it, describe how increase in physical activity affects the following organs. Students were expected to describe how increase in physical activity would affect certain listed organs. Organs listed were heart at number A, lungs at number B, kidney at number C, skin at number D. And then this particular candidate wanted to know if at all, if you don't know how the increase in physical activity would affect the heart, if you write correctly about the lungs and the kidney and the skin, whether you would still get. In exams like that question, you can see it has 4 organs. If every organ in the marking scheme is usually allocated a certain number of marks, like in this particular case, we were talking about 20 marks in that particular case. And how many organs did we have? We had 4 organs. It means that at least every organ a student was supposed to articulate around 5 marks per organ, because there are 4 organs. We are talking about 20 marks in that particular question. So if a student does not know the answer for the heart and probably writes correctly the answer for lungs and for the kidney and for the skin, then such a student would lose or miss the marks for the heart, which he or she doesn't know, but would get the one for lungs or the kidney, the ones which he or she may have written correctly. So that is the way we mark. We don't penalize without proper reason for penalizing. I hope you are answered. The student from Upper Kitanga, there's a boy who asked about essay answering and was interested whether we accept paragraph, we accept numbering of the essay. We always advise that whether you use paragraphs or you use what we call continuous prose, those I hope every student does English and you understand what I mean by continuous prose. So whether you use paragraph, whether you use continuous prose, what you should write should answer the question which is asked. Once a candidate answers the question which is asked in a correct manner, the manner of writing, unless it has been specified that you use paragraphs in the stem of the question or continuous prose, if it is not specified, the manner of writing remains a student's style of answering the question, which is not the business with the examiner. What the examiner expects is that a candidate should provide valid answers which are in the marking scheme. If you provide, it will be marked, regardless of whether it's a paragraph or a continuous prose. I think you are answered at that level. More questions.
Okay, let us have another question from St. Valentine's. Kindly, you can go ahead and ask a question. St. Valentine's.
Okay, thank you. And we have like 2 questions to ask.
Okay.
Question based on the scale. Should the y-axis scale be always similar with the x-axis? And the second question is, when you're told to describe an essay question, can you state the points, then you explain the point? Thank you.
So repeat the second question.
The second question is, when you're told to describe an essay question, can you
Yes.
state the point, explain the point? Thank you.
Can you state? Can you state?
When you're told,
yes, to describe
an
yes.
essay question,
yes,
can you state the points?
Yes.
Then can you state the point first, then you explain the points?
Can you say the point first and then you explain the points? You will get a very good answer. That's a very good question from St. Valentine's. 2 good questions. Can we welcome another?
Okay, Kitanga boys, kindly, you can go ahead and ask your question. Kitanga boys.
Yes. How do you know that our question, for example, in number 7 and 8, it requires an order?
How do you know 7 and 8 sequential? Sequential
Required answer.
or non-sequential?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, your question is taken clearly. It's very clear. You will get a very good answer. Just wait. Okay. Should I give a feedback? We wait.
Katelembu, Center of Excellence, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Katelembu, Center of Excellence.
Okay, my question falls under the graph section.
Yes.
Is there like a range which within which you should give your answer, or Or answers are accepted.
As in, come clear, range of?
Like when you're supposed to give your answer in a numerical.
Yes. Or when you are supposed to give your answer in numerical.
Yes.
Is there a range? Very good. That one is well taken. I will give you the correct answer now. Do we respond? Okay. So the question from St. Valentine, that girl was talking about the scale. Should they be similar, y-axis and x-axis? My answer by affirmative is no. X-axis and y-axis should not, it's not a must that they be similar. What determines the scale a student is narrowing down on should be the table you are given. What will determine my scale is the table. And that's the reason why I was very clear when I was describing on the scale. Choosing of the scale requires practice. You should narrow down to practice so that you know a suitable scale. Because any scale can draw a graph. But there is a scale which can draw a graph which would appear half of the paper. And remember, as per the rules we have in marking, the scale should cover 3/4 of the graph paper provided. So ask yourself this question: is this scale suitable for plotting? Is it suitable for plotting? Will I get the points easily to plot? If you will get the points easily to plot, and at the same time, the scale is covering 3/4, it will cover, the curve you will draw eventually will cover 3/4 of the graph paper, then you are good to go. But it doesn't mean that they be the same y-axis and x-axis. Remember, the example I've just given, that graph. Look at this example. Look at this example of this particular graph. If you are very keen and you are looking at this particular graph, you can see the horizontal scale is how many? The units, 10 small squares. I'm talking of horizontal scale. 10 small squares represents 1 hour. That is the horizontal scale. 10 small squares represents 1 hour. What about the vertical scale? The vertical scale talks about 5 small squares representing 10 glucose concentration. 10 glucose concentration per milligram of 100. So you can see they are different. So the answer is that it should not be the same. I hope you are well coordinated. Then another question was about the same St. Valentine. A girl has inquired whether describes, when you are asked to describe, a question on describe, whether you can first state the points and then you explain. My answer is that an answer given to an examiner should be an elaborate and a convenient answer to a marker. I would advise, as to, although every work done by examiner is marked, every work which is done by a candidate must be marked. Every work. We are under prerogative to mark any writing in blue pen by a candidate. But I would have wished if you can even have a rough area and sketch your points on this rough area, and then present these points together with the explanation. You would present a point and then explain it together, so that you bundle it together, so that this particular examiner, who is also a human being, subject to human errors, may follow it very clearly so that you may not be disadvantaged in one way or another. So on that question of whether you would state questions, points, and then answer them later, I would order, or in this particular case, advise that candidates should make sure that your answers are convenient for marking. You see, examiners are human beings. And at certain times, you may find that they may not follow whatever I don't say that they don't follow. We follow, but they are human beings, subject to errors. So that when you bundle your work together, a statement together with an explanation, and then you go to the next different one, then it will be easier to mark, and you will be able to gather all your marks. So that is the feedback for that. I hope you are well coordinated. Another question was from Kitanga Boys. And this student asked a very good question. Remember, when I was introducing essay question, I talked about sequential and non-sequential essay question. And in sequential essay question, I reiterated that in sequential questions, you must give step-by-step answers. It is a process answer. You should ensure that you follow one step leads to another. Now the question which have been given is that how do you know? How do you discover that this question is sequential and this question is non-sequential? Most questions which require sequence are very easy to know. Like honestly, Form 1 work digestion process. Can you digest food in the small intestine before digesting that food in the mouth? Biology students. Can you digest food in the stomach before that food passing into the esophagus? So a consequential question is a question which requires you to follow a certain process. That is the best example of consequential question in Form 1. We talk of the process of photosynthesis. It is a process. Photosynthesis remains a process. You must tell us about the light stage. You must tell us, after explaining for us the light stage, you must now tell us about the dark stage. It is a process. It is a consequence. It is consequential. Then, in the second one, I've talked about the process of photosynthesis, the process of digestion. Those are the consequential in Form 1. In Form 2, where we have many, the first sequential question comes on the process of absorption of water. Process of absorption of water. You must begin with these water molecules at the soil level. You must tell us that the concentration of water molecules is high in water, in surrounding water, than in the cell sap of the root hair cell. You must tell us of the osmotic pressure which is developed at the cell sap of the root hair cell. You must be consequential. You must tell us of the movement of water across the cell wall, cell membrane entering. You must tell us like that. You must move as the water is moving, passing across the epidermal tissues, surrounding tissues, until this particular water reaches the xylem vessel, which is usually located at the center. You must tell us those sequence. That is one of it. Another one is about the process of what? The process of heartbeat. Honestly, the process of heartbeat. You must tell us the waves of you must talk of the pacemaker at the sinoatrial node. You must talk of the movement of the waves of electrical excitation from sinoatrial node to atrioventricular node. You must talk of movement of the waves of excitation from the atrioventricular node to Purkinje tissues. You must tell us. It is a sequence, kind of. Even the process of the flow of the blood in a mammalian heart. How does the blood flow in the mammalian heart? You must tell us. So that is, but non-sequential questions. Non-sequential questions are easy, where they require adaptations. Those ones are the non-sequential questions. In most cases, they are for adaptations. Then last, in the graph question from Katelembu, Center of Excellence, a candidate has asked on the range. The range, when you are asked to give the numerals, like in this particular question, where the graph meets, where the curve meets, if you do that question very well, you will find that the curve meets at 6 hours and 12 minutes, and the marking scheme requires the answer to be plus or minus 2 minutes. Get that right. That is the range. So the marking scheme always have some small range on the graph, but that range is very small. Like right now, if it is 6 hours and 12 minutes, plus 2 is 6 hours and 14 minutes, minus 2 is 6 hours and 10 minutes. Candidates writing that range will be able to get it. But if you fall outside that range, you don't get it. That is the reason why accuracy in graph drawing should be very much considered. That is the end of the questions. I think we can respond to the ones which are written on the chat.
Okay, there is a question from Winnie Bingu, and they're asking, is it a must that as a candidate, I extend the vertical line of a graph and 0 to be at the middle? Will I be penalized if I write in the essay question in table form, e.g. parts, adaptation, and function? What if one is omitted?
So the question about, is it a must whether a candidate should extend the vertical line of the graph? Why do you want to extend? If the figures, like in that particular graph, if the figures are ending at, like this, our example illustration, the vertical scale here, the figures are ending at 56. The figures, the highest figure is 100. Then you can even give us a small allowance of even the next, let's say 120 or 110, depending on the range. But don't overextend. Why should you overextend? You are the highest value in the table is 100. Why should you reach 150? That one will mean that if you overextend, you will have a small graph. And remember the graph. When I say the graph should be 3/4, I don't mean the axis. I mean the curve. The curve should take 3/4 of the table of that particular paper, or the graph paper. So if you extend so much, you'll find that your curve will not get that. So don't extend so much. The other part of the question is that vertical line and 0 to be at the middle. Yeah, whatever happens at the 0 which is the origin, when it is standing for 2 axes, it should be placed at the middle. Where is that? The one for the slides. When the 0, the one for the slides. When the 0 is standing for both x and okay. Okay, I can just, yeah. Okay. When the 0 is standing for both x and y axis, then you are supposed to ensure that you extend both vertical and horizontal so that the 0 appears right at the center. I am showing you an illustration to that briefly, my technical team. So check that. Hope you are able to see that. That is a 0 which is standing for both x and y axis. But how is it coming out? It is coming out after the extension of this y-axis and extension of the x-axis. But when the 0, where shall I write? But just a minute, I show you something about that origin, because I know that one is a bony issue. It always gives us problems when we are marking. That one is always a very pertinent area. So I want you to understand the meaning of these zeros. I want you to understand the meaning of these zeros. Let us understand the meaning of these zeros. I'm just writing with a free hand, so my lines might not be straight. I'm not using any ruler. So this 0 stands for both X and Y axis. What about this 0? What about this 0? This 0 in this is number 1. In number 2, this 0 in number 2 stands for vertical axis alone. This one stands for vertical axis alone. It doesn't stand for horizontal axis. So when you write it here, it means that you must also write for this one. If you write for number 1, if you write it here, it means that you don't write another one elsewhere because it stands for both. But for this one, it stands for only y-axis, vertical axis. Then you can write also the one for horizontal axis here. Let's say you can write 5. You can write 5 there, showing me that you are beginning with number 5. You are beginning with number 5. You are not beginning with 0. You are beginning with number 5. That one is the position. So I think your question has been well responded to. And remember, for you to use these disjointed lines, it should be that there is no 0 here. Broken lines, broken line, broken axis means that there is no 0 here. We are starting not from 0. That one means that we are not starting from 0. We are beginning from a figure. Our graph begins from a figure which is not 0. Then you should write that figure here. And when you write that figure here, it means that you should proceed with now the correct scale which you have chosen. So that is all about that one. Let's go back to more questions. Yes. No, clear. That's clear. So let us go to more questions. I hope read for us the question, the technical team.
Okay, there is another question from Metuma Secondary School.
Yes.
They are asking, is it good to reply on positive impacts when answering an essay question?
Positive impacts when answering. I would have wished positive impacts when answering an essay question. I would have wished this particular candidate to be very much aware of the question. Because if I tell you that it is not good to rely on positive or negative impacts, then I will not be able to assist you. Remember, this platform is to make sure that you get the right thing. I would have wished this particular candidate to read whatever the question, or even if the question exists, you write for us that question so that I can see that question, which is giving you, which is making you to wonder whether to rely on positive impacts when you are answering an essay question. But the bottom line, when you're answering questions, is that you should understand the stem of the question. Understand the question. Most candidates, the ones I always see, both at the school level, at the national level, or whenever I'm privately tutoring candidates, most candidates begin to answer questions without understanding the context of that question. Understand the context of that question. If the examiner wants both positive and negative impacts, give. If positive impacts are the only ones which are needed, give. If negative impacts are needed only, give. So we are playing with the rules of the game and the rules of the question. I think you are well answered.
Okay, there is another question from Kwandanze. They're asking, do you have to write the scale or the examiner will get it from the graph?
That's a very good question. It is not a mistake to write your scale somewhere, but it has no marks when it is written. Marks is awarded to the scale on the graph. So there's no harm in writing the scale, like horizontal scale. 10 squares represents 10 hours. It is not wrong to write that, but it has no marks in the marking scheme. Marks for the scale comes when you write it on the graph, you label your graph, and the scale is consistent. In fact, it is, in most students, let the examiner to read the scale from the graph. But if you so wish to indicate it somewhere besides the graph paper, you can indicate it, just for clarity. But in most cases, it is not awarded at that level. It is awarded at the graph level. Think your answer.
Okay, there is another question from Changa Secondary School, and they're asking, for a question on essay, for example, absorption of water by root air, can one use a well-labeled diagram for that essay?
That is a very good question. Very good question. Here is a student who is wondering whether, if you are asked to describe the process of absorption of water by the root hair cell, whether you can use a well-labeled diagram. If you have been very keen on my submissions, I have been very clear that unless the examiner has indicated that with a well-labeled diagram, illustrate, we are answering the question. Remember, in everything we have the rules of the game. In every aspect of life, even if you finish school candidates, you will be dealing with the rules of the game. What has examiner asked? An examiner has asked you to describe. The diagram, labeled diagram, can only be an additional points you want, clarity to an examiner. But the most important thing is that labeled diagram cannot replace word written description. It cannot replace, right? If you want to add something to show an examiner that you clearly understand and you even would hide time to clarify, illustrate, then draw. But make sure that you describe, because the examiner has required you to describe. Think you are answered well?
Okay, there is another question from Kamudanga Secondary School, and they're asking, let's say that I'm handling an essay question and I'm using point form in answering. Will I be penalized while following the steps that are required to answer?
That is a very good question from Kamudanga. You are answering an essay question. An essay question, if you're answering it in point form, and then you're asking me whether you will be penalized. Let me give you a simple example to show you that you will be penalized. Of course, you will be penalized, because essay questions is not a question which requires you to state. Essay questions comes from comprehension part of Bloom's taxonomy. In secondary school, you don't learn Bloom's taxonomy, but Bloom's taxonomy talks about knowledge, which is paper 1, state, illustrate, things like that. But essay questions talks about comprehension. You are supposed to describe, you are supposed to explain, you are supposed to match. If the question requires you to describe, honestly, my dear student, and you are stating a point, you may get the point for statement if at all it is a marking, it is a marking point in the marking scheme. But if the marking scheme does not offer that, then you will be penalized. I would have wished, as you are preparing yourself for KCSE exams, I would have wished that you know how to respond to state questions, how to respond to describe questions, how to respond to or explain questions, and how to respond to account questions. There is a manner in which response is given. If you state instead of explaining or describing, automatically you will be penalized. Penalized as in not getting marks, which you deserve. That is the penalty we are talking about.
Okay, there is another question from Kakai Secondary School, and they're asking, is it correct to put 40 as your first value on the y-axis instead of breaking the line?
Is it correct to put 40? That one is in the graph solution. Honestly, let us go back to illustration table. Let us go back to an illustration table and see. We have 40. This student is wondering whether is it true that we can place 40 as our first point. I hope you are able to see. Okay. So let us draw a straight line, as simple as that. So is it clear for us? Is it clear? That is a set of axes. That's a set of axes. Now, suppose our figures begin with 40 and you write 40 here and you write 0 here. What is wrong with that? In biological graphs, this one is very clear, showing me that this particular candidate has 40 as the beginning of his y-axis, his vertical scale. 40 is the one which is beginning the vertical axis, while 0 is the one which is beginning the horizontal axis. And that one is very clear, very clear. And if you want to use the dotted line, it will mean, if you want to use the dotted line, it will mean in this particular case, so if you want to use a line which is broken, suppose that is a set of our axes, and you want to use a broken line, it means that this particular point, you will write that it is beginning with 0. You will indicate that it is beginning with 0, but your 0 has a breaking. It is broken like that. And then here is now 40. So which means that the drawing of your graph should begin from here, not here, which means that this area should not be counted as part of the graph. This area which you are breaking is not counted as the part of the graph. So if you are plotting, let's say we are plotting 1 hour versus 40. So when I'm plotting 1 hour versus 40, I will not include this part, this first one, the first 10 or 5, I will not include. So I will plot here. But it is, this one is 0, this side is 0. This side is also beginning with 0, but there's a part of the graph which is broken. There's a part of the section in that graph which is broken. So that is the meaning of the broken line. The meaning of the broken line means that the section which has been broken is not considered as part of that graph on a certain axis, but it may be considered on another axis. So that is the meaning of the broken line. I think you are well coordinated. That one always gives the problem.
Okay, there is another question from Katalemu Center of Excellence. They are asking, if one develops a shaky hand when drawing a graph in an exam room, what is he or she advised to do?
Yes, you are a young boy, probably of 18 years or 19 years, and you are developing, you have developed a shaky hand. Psychologically, that one means that you may be panicking during exams, because a young person of such an age should not be shaky. We expect old men like us to shake because the nervous coordination may have been disengaged at a certain point. What should I advise you to do? The most important advice is to reduce panic, because shaking comes from panic. Ensure that you don't panic. Be used to graph growing. Be very used to drawing of the graph, and you won't panic. And let me tell you something. If you ensure that, like right now, I know you are a subject of panicking, or maybe a friend of yours may be a subject of panicking. If you ensure that every day you practice drawing a graph, freehand, after 1 week along the line, you will make sure that the panic, the shaking of the hand will stop. So my advice in such a case, because as at a marking level, a graph which is drawn with shaken hands is not a smooth and continuous graph, which is penalized. So make sure that you avoid panic by practice, and this will end, because it is not tolerated at the marking level. Thank you. I hope you are coordinated.
Okay, there is another question from Kwanzanze Secondary School, and they're asking, are you allowed to extrapolate an hanging graph?
I had made, it's a good question. Extrapolation means extension of the graph should not be done. You are not allowed to extrapolate the curve unless you are advised by the examiner. Unless it is an instruction, you should not extrapolate. Moreover, an extrapolation should be written in a dotted manner, dotted line, to show whoever will be viewing the graph that it is an extrapolation. Don't write it as continuous as the normal curve. We don't allow extrapolation unless it is an instruction from the examiner. Think you are coordinated.
Okay, there is another question from Kamudanga Secondary School, and they're asking, is the graph supposed to have a title?
Thank you. That one has always been a debatable issue. Should a graph have a title? If you are an organized person and you are drawing a graph, you can write a title, as long as the title does not exceed 7 words. You should not write stories as the title. We count the number of words. A title should have at least 7 words, where even a is regarded as a word. Just the word a is regarded as a graph. The is regarded as a word. Make sure that it is less than 7 or less than 7 words, and it is well written. It should be relevant, and you wait whether the chief examiner, when we are marking, we have chief examiner who determines what to award marks for. So you just write and wait. If it will be awarded, you will get. If it is not awarded, you are an organized person. You wrote the title. I hope you are coordinated.
Okay, there is another question from Katalempo Center of Excellence, and they're asking, when answering graphical questions, can you use your own words instead of biological terms when one is unable to use them appropriately?
When answering graphical questions, can you use your own words instead of biological terms when one is unable to use them appropriately? My dear students, you are supposed to use biological terminologies. And that's the reason why most people ask me, Mwalimu, why do students fail in biology? Why do students fail in biology? Failure in biology comes from lack of use of correct terminologies. Like somebody, if a graph is on the rising trend, then you say that the graph is high instead of the graph, instead of the word rapid increase. You say high increase. High is English. In biology, we don't have high. We have rapid. We have exponential. We have decelerating. So use of biological terms. What do you mean by your own words? Your own words is English. We want to place you while you will take a course, let's say in nursing or medicine. We want to place you as an international student, somebody who can even go to America and work there as a doctor or a nurse. So make sure that you narrow down to biological terms, especially when you are answering questions on graph. I think you are well answered.
Okay, there is another question from Kitanga Boys High School. In essay questions, can we use diagrams in answering, like in blood clotting mechanism?
Very good question. Are you able to use diagrams like flow charts in answering, like in the process of blood clotting mechanism? I would advise that if a candidate is able to describe, because if a question asks you, describe the process of blood clotting, if you are able to describe the normal way, I would advise you describe. But if such a candidate finds difficulty in description process, this candidate should ensure that the flow chart diagram written should be very clear with all the required terminologies, biological terminologies. It should be clear. It should have arrows and broken arrows. It should have clear terminologies which are there in the description, and you might be considered for marking. But mark my word, you might. If you are asked to describe, please kindly describe using words. But if you can't describe, you can use a flowchart with all the required terminologies which exist in the description. Then you can be considered by the examiner. I think you are well coordinated.
Okay, there is another question from Kidima ABC Secondary School, and they're asking, when you are asked to plot two curves in one graph, can the plots of one curve be cross and the other curve, the plots be dots?
That one is a very good question. He or she wants to inquire whether you are, in fact, most biological questions, you are supposed to plot two curves in within one axis, and he wants to inquire whether one can have an X and another one can have a dot. This is my answer. X and dots are accepted in graphical plotting. They are accepted as per the secondary school level. In university level, when you go to university and other colleges, you will find others. There are so many methods of plotting. But in secondary school level, we accept X and dots. If well placed at the correct points, and not exaggerated, like a big X and a big dot, they are acceptable. They can be accepted. I think you are well coordinated.
Okay, there is another question from Mungana Secondary School, and they're asking, in drawing of graphs, can a student be penalized by not labeling the curves?
Very much. And by penalization, it means you lose the marks for labeling. Honestly, if you are drawing a graph, check this sample graph, which we have here. Check this sample graph, which we have here. The sample graph there. We have a sample graph. My technical team is bringing it in a short while. We have a sample graph. Check this sample graph. Honestly, I started by saying that a graph is a representation of a certain idea on a paper. There's an idea which we are representing on a paper. If you just draw, if you just plot and then you draw and you fail to label that graph, honestly, that particular information will not be well represented. The representation will not be complete. So what is always penalized is the marks for identification of the curve. Marks for identification of the curve. Check down here. There's marks for the curve drawing. This is marks for curve drawing. Is it a smooth curve? And this is the marks for identity. This one is the one for identity. This one is the marks for identity. This one. Have you identified that curve? So you will lose the marks for identity. It's always one mark. A half and a half. You lose that one mark. So I think you are well coordinated. You will be penalized. The marks for identity you will lose. But if you draw the curve correctly, you will gain the marks for the curve. But I advise my students or the students listening now to ensure that you identify the graph, because in graphical work, we are representing an information on the paper. I think you are well coordinated.
Okay, there is another question from Kamodanga Secondary School, and they're asking, let's say that I have been given a question to state the differences between chilopoda and diplopoda, and I go to an extent of saying that chilopoda has a pair of walking legs per segment, and diplopoda have short antennae. Am I going to be penalized? And if so, why yet both are there differences?
I've gotten a question, a student from Kamudanga Secondary School. That's a question which I think I've gotten. I think you have to be very honest with yourself also when you are trying to ask that question, because if examiner requires a candidate, if an examiner wants you to write the differences between a chilopoda and a diplopoda. Chilopoda are centipedes, diplopoda are millipedes. And then you give me you write the first difference as they have one pair of walking leg per segment. And then on the side of diplopoda, you talk about an antenna. It is not a difference. It is not a difference. Examiner expects that when you are talking about a pair of walking legs, talk also of about a pair of walking legs on the side of diplopoda. That is one statement which illustrates the difference. But you cannot compare, like right now, I cannot compare that this particular student has a shirt and the other student has a shoes. I am not making any comparison, to be honest. So that is the penalization that you will be given. Although the points are correct, of course, diplopoda has a short antenna, a chilopoda has one pair of walking leg per segment, but they are not giving the difference. We want you to show us chilopoda has one pair of walking leg per segment. What about diplopoda? You know very well from whatever your teacher has taught you that diplopoda has two pairs of walking leg per segment. That is the answer which is expected, and you give that. I hope you are coordinated.
Okay, there is another question from Kidima ABC Secondary School. They're asking, is it necessary for a graph to have a title?
That question we have already answered, and my answer was that as much as it may not have a mark awarded for it, but graphs, if you want to be an organized student, remember an impression. An examiner is a human being and is interested in some impression. If you just throw a graph without certain impression of a title, then this examiner may develop an impression about the type of a candidate you are. As much as in the marking scheme currently, we don't have marks for the title of a graph, but I would advise that if you can do a title, as long as the title is not more than 7 words, as long as the title is relevant and not more than 7 words, is acceptable and is even better. I think you answered.
Okay, there is a question from Mungala Secondary School. They're asking, is there penalization for using words like DNA, RNA, ATP in exams?
That's a good question from that student. That is Mungala Secondary School. If you use the word DNA, and even the word DNA you have written to us is in small letters, that word can have another meaning elsewhere. If you use the word RNA, it may also have another meaning elsewhere. If you use the word ATP, it may also have another meaning elsewhere in English. So I would have wished that if you're using an abbreviation, for the first time, make sure that you give us the meaning of that abbreviation in brackets. After you have included the meaning of it in bracket once, then now in the subsequent areas, you can now use it. Because an examiner is already now aware that if you write DNA, you mean probably deoxyribonucleic acid. You mean that. Because you had already indicated it somewhere in the what? In the bracket. But if you write an abbreviation like that, DNA, without first of all telling us what you refer by it, then an examiner will assume that you are writing something which is just spelled as that, and you will be penalized. So I think that advice is very clear. Abbreviations should first of all, the meanings of abbreviations should first of all be written, and subsequently, it's not a must now for you to write if you have to use them continuously. I think you are coordinated.
Okay, there is another question from Kamudanga Secondary School, and they're asking, in answering graphs, are there words that are expected in terms of long or short?
In answering graphs, does a graph have some expected words in terms of long or short? Your question may not be very clear or well understood to me, but my point in answering of graph, which is always a big problem to most of the students, is that you stick to accepted graphical biological terms. And I repeated them. I indicated the accepted biological terms in the graph very clearly. If there is an increase, then there are words we expect you to use. Words that we expect you to use are rapid. You can see rapid increase. Not long, rapid. Or exponential. This is a science subject. It's a science subject which is leading you to be a doctor, to be a researcher. Cambridge researcher, somebody researching for any other disease, including the one which is the pandemic currently. And you should speak in a manner, you should speak using terminologies in a manner that you can even relate with another researcher in America. So that we have our language, we have our biological language. So if you are talking of long and short, that is English. In composition, Mwalimu will accept that. But as in biology, we have our own terminologies. If something is, if a growth is rapid, use the word rapid. If the growth is slow, use the word slow. Use the word decelerating. Use the word exponential. If something is growing at a faster rate, those are the terminologies we accept. Other than that, English terminologies, they are discouraged. You may find that they may be marked correctly, but in most cases, they are discouraged. They are not pleasant. They are not accepted. I think you are coordinated.
Okay, there is another question from St. Bernard. They're asking, is it good to indicate the x-axis and y-axis?
Yeah, that's a good question. After placing the arrow, back to the writing. After placing the arrow here now, let us erase it, then make me to write a line. So I want to illustrate something here so that you can understand where you can write y-axis and x-axis. Of course, it is something which you should write. So now this is my line, Cartesian plane, that is the vertical axis. This is the horizontal axis, Cartesian plane. well written. This is an arrow. This is an arrow you place. Cartesian planes has arrows. You place that arrow there. Then you may want to show that this is a Cartesian plane. Cartesian, the originator of this plane, wrote this one up here, y-axis. He indicated there as y-axis. He also indicated this one as x-axis. It is not wrong if you indicate that, although it is not penalized at the neck level, but it is just a sign of somebody who is organized, somebody who is doing the right thing, although it may not be organized, penalized, or although it may not give you marks, but that is the correct thing to do. I hope you are well coordinated. So we are still responding to more questions. So if you have more questions.
Okay, there is another question from Kamaganga Secondary School. What is meant by the term biological control and an example of it?
Let me just brush. So I think content question, we discouraged a lot about content questions because you have a teacher, very able and experienced teacher with you there, and you should keep on consulting. But just maybe to summarize, biological control is using living organisms to control pests. Like for example, sometimes in ecology, we can use birds to reduce the number of ticks. That is biological control. A bird is a living thing, and a tick is also a living thing. So that is biological control. But for many content questions like that, you have an able teacher there who is with you there, and make sure that you confirm and inquire from them.
Yes, Chanda Secondary School, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Kindly answer me this question. Under what condition would a plant take in more water than it is losing by transpiration? The second one, a plant loses more water than it is absorbing from the soil.
So I think you are getting our instructions. We are working with instructions here. We are working with instructions here, and our instruction is that this first session of this particular online streaming was to make sure that a candidate knows marking skills. A candidate was supposed to know marking skills, requirements when you're doing exams. Most of those questions, if you have them, you can air them maybe in the second circle if the management will allow. We are not supposed to answer content questions. But if the management will allow in the next session, because this is just the beginning of this particular live stream, then we shall respond to them. And under what condition would a plant take in water than it is losing? Under what condition would a plant take in water than it is losing? That is a very clear question. That's a very clear content which you can find in Form 2 work transpiration. Go and check Form 2 work transpiration. You will get the answer to that question.
Okay, Katoloni, you can go ahead and ask your question. Yes, Katoloni. Katoloni. Katoloni.
Is from the chapter of response and restoration and coordination in plants. And then it is from a graph, which when you are given has got. And
make sure that you are clear on your end.
For example, The
Yes.
graph which was in the year 2018,
Yes.
question 6 2018,
Yes.
from the chapter of response and reception and coordination in plans,
Yes.
where the values which you were given had the negative signs.
Yes.
For example,
Yes.
I can read the question how it was.
Yes.
And you are being taught the effect of oxygen concentration or growth response of two parts of the plant X and Y was.
Yes. Continue.
The
Continue.
concentration of oxygen in parts and in million.
Yes.
Then you are being given 10 raised to negative 6,
Yes.
10 raised to negative 5,
Yes.
10 raised to negative 4,
Yes.
10 raised to negative 3,
Yes.
10 raised 10.
Come up, come up, come up. I've gotten your question.
Yes.
I've gotten your question. In 2018, there was a question which was having negative powers, and the candidates did it based on the powers which they were given. You are aware that negative 6 is smaller than negative 5. Negative power raised 6 is smaller than negative power raised 5. You are aware of that? Is off. Such that now, such questions which have negative powers, the report we gave out is that because they may not be very clear for candidates to value them, we encouraged candidates to consider the powers and know that between the power which is higher than the other, and still plot. Because if negative 6 is higher, is smaller than negative 5, you can still plot, and then you can still come up with a scale and then plot. Students who followed that came up with a very good graph, because they were considering, they were having the beginning, which was the origin, which was 0. Then they were having negative, let's say negative 6, which was smaller. Then they were moving to negative 5, which was a little bit stronger than negative 6, and they were having points to plot. Because if anything, you are not plotting the negatives. You are plotting the values which you have been given. So the most important thing in the graph, you are not even plotting any meaning. Negative 5, negative 10 may have an abstract meaning to you, but you are not dealing with the negatives. You are not plotting negatives. You are plotting figures which you have been given to come up with a graph. So it is possible. It is very possible if you plot it at that level. So the point is that such questions with negatives, a candidate must know which negative is stronger than another. Like if you tell me 10 negative 1 and 10 negative 2, which one is stronger? Which one will I plot first? Automatically, 10 negative 1 is stronger than 10 negative 2. So 10 negative 2 should come as a smaller level than 10 negative 1. That is the point which as candidate was supposed to know at that particular level. But I think you are coordinated. So just to wrap up, I want to revisit the graph marks awarding. There may be something which did come out clearly, and I've been informed by the technical team so that I can revisit it. Graph, in most cases, you will get 8 marks with the graph. Axis talks about vertical axis and horizontal axis. What about it? Have you talked about time? Have you talked about time? Like in this particular case, if it is time, it is in which units? Is it in hours? If it is the vertical axis, is it glucose concentration in blood? What are the units? If you label the graph, if you label the axis correctly, then you get these 2 marks. 1 times 2 means that you get 1 mark for 2 axes. Then let us go to the scale. What is the meaning of this, the word scale? Is the scale you have come up with workable with the values you have been given? Is it a workable scale? Is it a scale which can be plotted? Can you plot it? Is it consistent? Check mine over here. We are moving from 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and 100. That scale is consistent. Is your scale consistent? Or you are moving from 10 to 30, to 20, to 25? Is it consistent? Check my horizontal scale. Horizontal scale, which has time, is moving very well. It is moving from 10 small squares has 1 hour. Another 10 small squares has 2 hours, and so on and so forth. So that is what we mark at scale. You get 2 marks. Then let us look at the plotting. Plotting, everybody knows plotting. You must check the value on your horizontal scale and value on your vertical scale, and where they meet. That is the point where you place a mark. And we talk of a dot and an X. That is the plotting. When you plot well, the whole of that curve, when it is well plotted, you get 1 mark. If there are 2 curves, you plot another one well, you get another mark. How many marks? 2 marks. Then curve. What do I mean by curve? I think that the point of curve is what may have not come out clearly. A curve is the way you pass through the points. How are you passing through those points? Are you passing through those points clearly? Is your curve smooth? Is it passing at the points? Or is it dirty, rubbed? Is your curve having 2 lines? There are some candidates who always feature 2 lines along the same curve. Is it smooth? Is it well drawn passing through the points? So if you have that, then you get these marks for curve. Every curve well drawn always earn a half a mark. And how many curves are they? There are 2 curves. That one will bring for us 1 mark. Then I go to a place for identity. I go to a place for identity. In identity is the labeling of the curve. Have you written it inhaling? Does this curve stand for inhaling? Does this curve stand for injection? So if you identify your curve, you get a half for each identification. And how many identifications do we expect in this our case? We expect 2 identifications, which give you 2 times a half gives you 1. So if you add all this, you will get the 8 we are talking about. You add 2 plus 2, that is 4, plus 1, that is 5, plus 2, that is 7, plus 1, that is 8. So that is the clarification about the award of marks on the graph. So my technical team has instructed me that I think we should be wrapping up. This was just the first session. There may be many other sessions which we may have in future, because the program, according to the instructions we have, is here to stay. And even there are ways your teachers can reach us. If there is now a face-to-face discussion, maybe with a school or any other thing. But generally, paper 2 is one of the most easier paper to pass, because a student has a graph which has 8 marks. Anybody can draw a graph. A student has an essay question to choose from. You can choose a simple and easy essay question for you to tackle. I hope and wish you all the best in your undertaking as you revise. and I wish you success in your forthcoming examination. May God bless you. Thank you very much.